Okay, so yeah, many thanks to everyone at Tokyo JALT for the invitation to speak today. Thanks to Don Lukovic and Matthew and Jackie. As Jackie mentioned, we were going back and forth a lot, trying to schedule this many times, so here we are finally. So because of this webinar venue, today's talk is a little bit different from what I had originally planned. It's going to be a little bit less interactive, but there is one or two activities for you to do. And I'm going to be introducing several websites which you can look at on your own computer as I'm talking about them. So I'm going to talk for about 45 minutes, and then there will be 15 minutes for Q&A at the end. So please use the Q&A function for that. So yeah, today's talk is about vocabulary and why it's so important to reading. And then in the second part, we're going to look at what teachers can do to support their learners in the reading classroom. Just some background about me and this topic. I've been interested in this topic for a long time. Probably what sparked my interest was when I was living in the United Arab Emirates. I went to a pre-conference workshop with Cheryl Zimmerman and Paul Nation, and that really sparked my interest in how vocabulary was important to reading. So that was way back in 2009. So I've been reading a lot about it and writing a lot about it, including the PhD work that I did. So because of that long time interest, I'm sometimes a little taken aback when my colleagues ask me, why are you so focused on vocabulary? This isn't a vocabulary course, this is a reading course. And I don't know what a vocabulary course would be, but I do know what a good reading course is, a well-designed reading course. And it certainly includes an aspect that pays attention to vocabulary. So that's a good reminder to me why I need to make explicit the importance of vocabulary to second language reading. Reading is a very complex process, and people who do it well, which is probably the attendees here today, people who do it well rarely have insights into the complex processes that are involved. So I'm going to start by briefly talking about some of those processes, and then we're going to move on to focusing on vocabulary. So this is the overview of today's talk. I will start with some research, hopefully convince you that vocabulary is very important to second language reading, if you're not already convinced. And then in the second part of today's talk, we're going to look at some practical tools that you can use in the classroom, including online classrooms if your university is going online in the fall. So these are things that I do every term with every group of students, testing students' vocabulary level, assessing the reading text that I'm using in terms of the vocabulary, targeting vocabulary for them to learn, and then testing vocabulary regularly. I'm not going to get to the last one probably, closed test, so that might be for another time. Okay, so let's start with this quote from Charles Perfetti. He's a world-renowned reading researcher based in the US. He investigates reading as a cognitive scientist. So let me read the quote with you. In reading, the single recurring cognitive activity is the identification of words. And from this follow two other related observations about reading. Comprehension depends on successful word reading. And skill differences in comprehension can arise from skill differences in word reading. Now, what Perfetti is talking about here is the importance of lower level processing to reading comprehension. And originally I wanted to talk more about how to develop lower level processing skills. We won't have so much time to talk about that, but I will start with some definitions and then we'll move on to vocabulary. So reading processes are broadly grouped into lower level and higher level. So lower level is what you can think of this as text-based. So this includes orthographic processing like letter and word recognition, vocabulary processing, semantic knowledge, phonological awareness. So this is like the ability to look at a text and just automatically and quickly and efficiently look at a word, know how to pronounce it. That's lower level processing. This is in contrast with higher level. You can think of this as what the reader brings to the text. So making inferences, connecting one's background knowledge to the information that's in the text, predicting what's going to come next. What's important to understand about these processes is that they are hierarchical. So that means that your lower level processes need to be efficient and automatic in order for higher level processing to also work efficiently. And it's not reciprocal. So that means you can't use your higher level processing skills to make up for or compensate for deficient lower level processing. So yeah, they need the word identification skills need to be automatic and efficient. If not, what happens is that there's too much competition in the working memory, and then comprehension begins to break down. So if the reader is stumbling at every 10th word, trying to figure out what that word means, by the end of the paragraph, comprehension is broke down. So in L1 reading context, so where children are learning to read in their first language, educational theorists originally thought that once you taught children the letters and they would, and how to pronounce them and so forth, that those lower level skills would eventually just become automatic, and that as teachers, we needed to focus on higher level processing skills, so teach students how to read between lines and answer comprehension questions and so forth. But actually the inverse is true. Another well-known reading researcher, Mark Siedenberg, he explains it this way. If you tell a young child a story, that child will understand it. But if you ask that child to read the same story, they won't be able to unless they have letter and word recognition skills to read that story for themselves. So we don't need to teach comprehension so much as focus on word identification skills. And that's especially important in our teaching context where our learners are processing a writing system that is different from their first language. So children, when they're learning their first language, they get hundreds and hundreds of hours of practice so that their word recognition skills are automatic and efficient. And then they move on to learning, the higher level skills that I mentioned. I mention that now because L1 pedagogy and research has had an impact on L2 reading pedagogy. And a lot of emphasis is placed on teaching comprehension skills to people who already know how to read in their first language. Second language readers usually read quite well in their first language, not always, but sometimes. But what the second language readers don't get is the practice with lower level skills. So this would include like a lot of extensive reading practice and vocabulary work, for example. So I had wanted to talk more about how to develop lower level skills in general, but we're going to have to focus just on vocabulary today. It is one aspect, and so that's what we'll focus on. So how much vocabulary is necessary for adequate comprehension? And by adequate, I mean if you wrote a test on something you read, could you get about 70%? That would be adequate comprehension. So how much vocabulary of that text do you need to know? If you know the first 2,000 words of English, the most first 2,000 common words of English, you would know about 80% of any text that you come across. So would that be a good start? Would knowing 80% be enough to comprehend the text? Sounds like a lot, right? So I'm going to get you to do an activity now, and you can do it by yourself because this is reading class. I'm going to show you a text on the next page, and I'm assuming you are an EFL teacher, so you're going to have background knowledge of this topic, which is going to help you. Reading isn't only vocabulary, background knowledge can help you as well. And for this short paragraph, you're going to know 80% of the words. Something we often ask our students to do is to use context to guess the words that they don't know. So if you have a pen next to you, maybe you can jot down some guesses for the unknown words. What do you think they mean? And for a lot of us teaching in academic settings, we expect our students to learn new information from what they're reading. So as you're reading this, think about whether you would be able to summarize the information from this paragraph. Okay, so here's the text, and I will give you 1 minute, maybe a minute and a half to read that. Okay, that's a minute and a half. I hope that's enough time for you to read that paragraph and make some guesses about the unknown words. I hope that we can agree that maybe 80% isn't enough. Some of the words were repeated in this paragraph, so maybe that helped you make a guess about the meaning. Background knowledge may have helped you. But keep in mind, many of our students in academic settings don't have the background knowledge they need for what they're learning in English. And another thing to keep in mind is the length of this text. So this is one short paragraph. We usually ask our students to read much longer passages, and then this buildup of unknown vocabulary can really be taxing on the working memory. So here is the original, the real text for your information. Why isn't that working? There it is. Okay. So you can compare your answers. Okay, so hopefully we agree that 80% is not enough. So how much vocabulary do you need to know for adequate comprehension? So let me talk briefly about two studies. The first one is from an L1 reading context, so for people who are reading in their native language. This study was done by Carver in the early 90s. He found that vocabulary knowledge did correlate with reading comprehension. So he was working with two groups of students, elementary school age students and university students. And what he did is he gave them texts that he knew would be at their level, more difficult for their reading ability, and then slightly too easy for their ability. And he simply asked them to circle any unknown words in the text. That's all they needed to do. And he found that when they knew all the words in the text, that text was easy for them. And when there was only 1% unknown, it was appropriate for their reading abilities. So in 100 running words, only one word was unknown, then that text was at their ability. And when there was as little as 2 unknown words for every 100, the text became difficult. And this is for people who are reading in their first language. So even just small percentage of unknown vocabulary can impact your comprehension. How about second language reading studies? There's been a lot, but the one I'm going to talk about is from SCHMITT, Zhang, and Grabe. They looked at 2 aspects. They looked at vocabulary knowledge and background knowledge, and how did these affect reading comprehension. And the reason I'm talking about this one is it's a very strong study. It has a very robust design. First strength of this study is they had a very large sample size, but also their readers, they were quite proficient readers of English. They were adults, but they came from 12 different first language backgrounds. And that's important because your first language impacts how you read in your second language. For example, writing system is an obvious example. So that was a strength. Another strength of this study was how they tested the vocabulary. So they had 2 texts. They were looking at background knowledge. So one text was supposed to be familiar topic, and that was about climate change. And then the other text was supposed to be unfamiliar topic, and that was about lab mice or something. And they actually, when we say that the participants knew 90% of the words, they actually tested the words in those 2 texts. So it wasn't just in general, like a guess. They were actually testing the words in those 2 texts. And then another strength was how they tested comprehension. So they did use multiple choice, but the problem with multiple choice is that you can guess. And so they used graphic organizers as well to test comprehension, which graphic organizer shows the organization of the text, and then some pieces are blanked out and some are filled in. So that's very difficult to guess at if you don't understand the text. So to be able to fill in that kind of task. And if you're interested in graphic organizers, you can Google that with Zhang's name, the second author. I think she did that as part of her PhD work with Grabe, I think. So she has a lot of free graphic organizers online for teachers to use. Okay, so what did they find out? They gave these 2 texts to their participants, and they tested how much vocabulary they knew from those 2 texts. And so when the participants knew 90% of the words, they scored on average 50% on the comprehension tests. And when the participants knew 95%, they scored 60%. And 98% vocabulary knowledge for the texts that they had background knowledge. So for the climate change text, they scored 70% on average. So that would be adequate comprehension. But for the lab mice one, it was less because they didn't have that. And then when they knew 100% of the words, they still only scored 75% on the test. So their findings and recommendations. They found that 98% vocabulary coverage would allow for, but not ensure, 70% comprehension. So remember, these are averages, so some did better, some did worse. So for academic texts where students are learning new content, they recommend 98% coverage. It has to be quite high because the background knowledge isn't there necessarily. And then, yeah, the effect for background knowledge was only seen when more than 95% vocabulary knowledge was known. And I found similar results with cultural background knowledge. on a replication study I did. Cultural background knowledge doesn't help unless you know at least 95% of the vocabulary. Okay, so just to summarize this section then, keep these two numbers in mind. So 95% vocabulary knowledge. So in 20 words, like 2 short sentences, only 1 word is unknown. That would be a good for classroom texts, because the teacher is there to support the learner with glosses and with the other unknown vocabulary. And then 98% is the other magic number we should keep in mind. That's if you have 50 running words, only 1 of them would be unknown. That's good for academic texts if you're teaching new content. And it's also a recommended number for independent reading. So if your students are doing extensive reading, that's a good number to aim for. Okay, so keep those 2 numbers, 95 and 85. Sorry, 95 and 98. Keep those in mind for later when we make our profile. So now we're going to move on to more practical tools for the teacher, how you can support your learners. And these are things, as I mentioned, I do these every term with every new group of students. So first thing you need to do is test your students' vocabulary level. Even if your school streams students, which I'm sure they do, every student is different in terms of the vocabulary knowledge I've found. And students like to know this actually, where they are. So it's always a good thing to do. Secondly, once you have that information, then make a vocabulary profile of the reading text that you're using to compare with their level. And then using that profile and your student's level, use that information to choose target vocabulary for them to learn. And this is exciting. Test them regularly with no prep quizzes. You'll never have to make another vocabulary quiz again. Yay! So that's good. Okay, so let's start with testing students' vocabulary level. I am talking about level, not size. Size would tell us how many words they know in total, which is not interesting to me. I would like to know their level by frequency in the language. So how many of the 1,000 most common words do they know? How many of the 2,000 most common words do they know? Generally, high frequency words are known better than low frequency by nature, that they come across them more. But in Japan, it's often the case that students learn these low frequency words because they are perceived by teachers to be difficult words. High frequency does not mean easy. High frequency means common. The first 2,000 words of English have, on average, 6 different meanings. So these are not easy words. They are high frequency. They are common. And low frequency words, maybe they look difficult because we don't see them a lot, but there's not really much purpose in spending time learning them, because your student's chance of coming across those words again is quite low. So really should be focusing on the high frequency words. As I mentioned before, if you know the first 2,000 words of English, which your students might not, but if they do, they can understand almost 80% of any text. So that's a good start. It's not enough, but it's a good start. So I'm going to suggest 2 tests that you could try. Here's the website where you will find them. The first one is called the VLT by SCHMITT and Klassen. It's been around for almost 20 years. So you'll see it, if you're doing research, you might want to use this one because it's cited a lot in other reading studies. So if you want to compare your results to other ones, this might be a good one to use. This test is offered at the Amazon Prime. Sorry. This test is offered at the 2K, 3K, academic word, 5K, and 10K levels. I wouldn't bother doing the 10K level unless I was teaching graduate students. which I'm not. So I wouldn't bother with 10K level. 5K level, I might only test if I was teaching like upper intermediate students. The second test that I can recommend to you is called the updated VLT by Webb and colleagues. This one has some advantages over that, in that it tests the 1K to 5K inclusive. So if you have, high beginner students, you might definitely want to know, how many of the first 1,000 words they know. So that's an advantage over the first test. Both of these tests are offered in print and interactive versions. So if you're teaching online this term, that's good for you to know. I did the Webb and colleagues one this last spring, and it worked quite well. But first, let me talk about the pros of using print. If you're using print version, you can encourage your students not to guess. We're not interested in how many words they can guess. We want to know how many words they know. And you can also choose which levels you want to do. So with the interactive ones, they just have to do all of them. Or you can, so that's not so great. It can get frustrating for them. There are pros to using the online version. So there's no marking, yay. And as I said, the web version of the updated VLT, there's actually a place where the student can enter your email address and her email address, and then both of you will get the results. So that's quite neat. So that's great for online teaching. So how are these tests marked? Just so that you understand what your students are going through when they do this. They're only testing 30 words at each 1,000 level. And for that reason, there has to be a high percentage correct for us to consider that level to be known. So SCHMITT and colleagues recommend 27 out of 30 would be known level, and Webb and colleagues recommend 26 out of 30. And I would explain these results to my students. I think for many Japanese students, vocabulary is this big mystery, maybe. Show them these results and explain to them what that means, and put the power in their hands to direct their own learning. So I'd like you to show you this website. I don't know if my thing there is in the way. So this is oxfordlearnersdictionaries.com. They have some word lists, and these your students could use. So the Oxford 3000 is their core vocabulary for students at the A1 to B2 level. If your school likes to use CEFR bands, the Common European Framework Reference. So I'm not going to show it to you today, but basically the student can go to the list. There's filters that they can use which list they want to focus on. They can either look for words that they don't know, and then click on the word and get a definition and examples, or they can type in a word. So if they're studying on their own and they're not sure if they should be focusing on this word, they can put that in, and if it comes up, they know it's in their list, and then they can study it. So that's a nice one for students to use if you have those kind of keen students. But I think students are quite interested to know this. Okay, so once you've tested their vocabulary level and you know what level they're at, then you should look at your reading texts and create profiles to see how difficult the text is going to be for them. A lot of us don't have choices in what we use in the classroom, so it's good for you to know, how your students are going to find this reading material. So on your screen now, you can see an example of a vocabulary profile. I chose a New York Times article at random. And the profiler came back with this. So those percentages are cumulative. So remember I said if you know the first 2,000, you'll know about 80%. Well, for this one, it's just under that, so 78%. And then after 2000 level, the coverage drops off rapidly. So you can see if you know the 3000, it's only going to give you another 3% coverage. And if you know the academic words, it's only going to give you another 1% coverage. I think I put that there to demonstrate that newspaper articles are not easy. Teachers like to use them in the classroom, but in terms of Lexis, they can be quite difficult. And depending upon your teaching context, they're not often not academic texts. If this was an academic text, the academic vocabulary might constitute like 8 to 9% of the text, and here it's only 1%. So they're not great in terms of academic vocabulary. Okay, so why is a vocabulary profile useful? It can show you how difficult the text is in terms of vocabulary, which is good to know. It will very quickly show you which words appear more than once in the text, which is good because those are probably useful words to learn. And it can also help you quickly identify low frequency words, which might not be worth your students spending time on learning, and you could gloss those for your students and then, you know, ease the burden for this difficult text a little bit. So I'm going to demonstrate how to do a vocabulary profile. It's the same website as where you found those tests, but this time it's under the VP section, vocabulary profile. And there's some decisions you have to make. You have to decide which profiler to use. You have to decide which framework to use. I'm going to demonstrate the British National Corpus and the Corpus of Contemporary American English because it shows the 1K to the 25K levels. So, and you have to decide what to do with the proper names. So I'm going to suggest that you treat them as off list, and I'll explain that in a second. And then remember those percentages we had earlier, those 95% was good for classroom, and 98% is good for independent reading or academic texts. This framework, the BNC COCA, actually will highlight that for you, which is one reason I'm going to show you that one. So I'm going to go to that website. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen. And then I'm going to choose the vocab profiler. Okay, so this is what it looks like. So people sometimes get scared by how this looks. It's very colorful, but there's a lot of information here. So rather than showing you a lot of screenshots, I thought I would just demonstrate this. So on the left-hand side, there are the profilers you can choose from. And I recommend you choose the third one down, VP Complete. So, and that's where all those different frameworks are going to be. So I'm going to click on that. And now those frameworks appear on the top right-hand side. So depending upon your teaching context, for example, you could do the new general service list and TOEIC words if you're teaching TOEIC. And next to each framework, there is a little question mark that you can click on to get more information about that framework. But as I said, I'm going to choose the BNC and the COCA. Sorry, I'm moving this around a lot. So here in this box, that's the instructions how to do this. So if I do this too quickly, you always can look at those later. So you just delete those. And then I've already copied a short story. So I'm going to paste this here. It's a short story that I chose quite at random. You paste that there. And then remember I said you need to do something about the proper names in the text. Now, proper names is in green at the bottom of the screen. And by default, it says class them as 1K. So that means they're going to disappear in all the 1K words. And I don't recommend you do that. I suggest you choose off list because that way you're going to be able to see them quite quickly. And so if you need to help your students with any of the names in the text, it's much easier for you to find them. So that's all you need to do. Choose your framework, paste in your story, change the default setting on the proper noun thing, and then click submit. And then this is your feedback that you get. So on the, we're going to be looking on the left-hand side, the black box. So on the right-hand side of the black box, there's the cumulative percentages again. And there's that magic number 95. Do you remember I said 95 was good for classroom use? So if my students knew the first 3,000 words, which this year they do, this would be a good text for them because I could be confident that they would know 95% of the words in this story. And, you know, I could help them with some other words. So that's what I like about using the BNC COCA framework is it actually highlights that for you. If we scroll down a bit, I don't actually see 98% coverage, and that's probably because there's a lot of off-list items. So I wouldn't use this for independent reading, but I certainly would use it for classroom use. And if you look at the percentage next to 2K, you'll notice that the cumulative percentage is 93%. That's quite high. So that means there's a lot of, you know, high frequency words in this story, which is good. That's going to help with comprehension. Okay, so we can scroll down a bit and look at some more feedback from the profiler. So what you will see when you scroll down is on the right-hand side is your whole text, and now it's color-coded. So all the blue words are 1K, all the green words are 2K, and so on. And I like to look in this middle part where it says repeated words. Words that appear more than once in a text are good for your students to learn if they don't know them already, because they're going to see them in different contexts, which is great when you're learning vocabulary. So as I said, my students already know the 2K and the 3K, so I probably wouldn't choose any of those words unless I thought, you know, teacher intuition, unless I thought that they didn't know that, then I might put that on a list. But for example, the word elevate appears 10 times in this text. Definitely that's a word to choose for learning if your students don't know it. Okay, and then this is quite a long short story. It's about 1,800 words. So there's a lot of input there. But then keep scrolling down. Okay, now this is the other part of the information that I like to look at. These are now all the words grouped according to their frequency. So you can look at all these 1K words. So a huge part of this text is 1K words. Those are all, so that's a lot. Quickly drops off for the 2000. But this input is another way for you to look at it. For example, in the green words, apartment appears 7 times. So it has apartment and then 7. That means it appears 7 times. So that's another way to look at that same information in a different way. There's the 3K drops off a lot, right? Okay, so I said my students know the first 3K, so I would focus on words from the 4K band, because these are the next, they're called mid-frequency words that my students should be working on. So I would, yeah, so I would choose from here, for example, yeah, shrunken and span, well, there's a lot. And maybe I could also choose from 5K. What I would not choose are lower than that, like muzzle. I'm not sure why leopard is 8K, but tenement. It's a 9K word. It's going to be a long time till your students see that word again, so not really worth them spending time on. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing this screen. That's what the profiler looks like, and you can play around with that. I'm going to go back to the slideshow. And I realize the time is nearing the end, so I got to work quickly here. Another option, which I'm not going to demonstrate today, because it's quite slick, actually, is, well, slick, it looks quite clean. It's on the same website I mentioned before, Oxford Learners Dictionaries, and under Tools, you will see something called Text Checker. It'll give you back feedback in terms of SEFR. So Oxford has decided that high frequency words are either A1 or A2 or B1. And so that's how they've labeled them. And then mid-frequency words for them are from their Oxford 5000. So you can put your text in there, but the input's going to come back in terms of SEFR levels. So you would have to know what SEFR level your students are. So if your students are A2, you would choose A2 words for learning. That's their recommendation. So it's quite cool. You could have a look. And yeah, they have exercises. LexTutor also makes exercises for you, but you know, this one will make word lists for you automatically and stuff, and you can export them. So it might be kind of fun to play with that as well. Okay, step 3 of what you need to do. So I already talked about this, so I'm just going to briefly repeat what I said when I was looking at the profiler. You need to choose target vocabulary for your students to learn. Focus on high and mid-frequency words, depending upon their level. Definitely choose words that appear more than once. For low-frequency words, I would gloss those, either in English or Japanese. But you also need to, you know, use your teacher hat. Look for less frequent or idiomatic usage. This is an example from a text I was profiling, and it talked about being a driver for change. And driver is a 1K word, but I didn't think my students would be familiar with that particular usage of the word driver. So I actually did highlight it for learning. If your students don't know the 2K words, target words from that level. If they know the 3K, then you're ready to move to the 4K. I don't know if that's obvious, but what I'm trying to stress here is don't jump to really low frequency words. They need to spend time learning words that they're actually going to come across again in their English studies. Other words that you could choose are academic words if you're teaching in an academic context, and technical words that are specific to that text. So if a word appears 10 times, but it's low frequency, well, target that for learning, because that would be really frustrating to see a word so many times. And yeah, so, okay, and then test regularly. I really think it's an important job for teachers to encourage students to study vocabulary. And the only way they're going to do that is if you test them. Consider how many words they're learning in their other courses. Research shows people can learn 7 new words a day, but I mean, how keen are your students? It really depends, right? Provide them with the lists of words that you want them to learn and the associated parts of speech. Don't keep it a mystery what words you want them to learn. You know, actually provide them with those lists and explain to them why you chose those words. It really demystifies this whole vocabulary learning thing. Encourage them to use word cards, for example, either paper cards or Quizlet or Anki. It's much better. Flashcards force recall. Thanks, Matthew. They force recall, unlike reading word lists that students seem to like. So here's an exciting part of the presentation. Use simple quizzes that require no preparation and they're relatively quick to mark. So I got this from Ellie Hinkle, or this is how she described it. I'm not sure if this is exactly what hers looks like, but this test you could use for everything. So if I give my students 20 words to learn, I tell them that 10 of those 20 words are going to be tested. I don't tell them which 10, but so they should study those 20. And then I choose 10, I dictate them, and the student writes them down, and then they write a short definition, not an example sentence. So we're testing their orthographic knowledge. Spelling is important for test like the IELTS test, right? You need to know correct spelling. Can they, when they hear the word, do they recognize it? So that's phonological awareness. And then the semantic knowledge, right? Do they know what the word means? And you could direct them to the Longman Dictionary for Learners. Has definitions from the first 2,000 words of English, so definitions that students can easily understand and commit to memory. I don't ask for example sentences because sometimes it's hard to tell if a student actually understands the word from their example sentence. Okay, so whoops, summary. So here we are. Yes, so as a teacher, you need to test students' vocabulary levels, then check your reading texts in terms of vocabulary. And from number 1 and 2, then target your vocabulary you want them to learn, and then encourage them to revise by testing them. Otherwise, they probably won't. There are the references. And here we are at Q&A. So a little bit over time, but I think I can stop sharing that, right?
Yeah. Welcome back.
Okay, great.
Thank you very much. Really, really lovely.
Okay, great.
Oh, so now, if anybody has any questions, I see there's one in the Q&A, but if not, please type in your question, and then Phil can turn you on if you want to ask, turn on your microphone if you want to ask a question or such. So, please.
Okay, so well, I'm looking at the question in the Q&A box. Do I not recommend the new general service list? Yes, no, I do. So this was devised by Brown and colleagues. Yeah, and their website has a lot of activities for teachers to use. And then in that profiler, I was showing you one of the frameworks you can choose, not the BNC COCA, but the other framework is New General Service List. And then you can choose New Academic Word List or TOEIC, for example, if that's your teaching context. So yes, I do recommend that, definitely. Thanks for bringing that up. Good point. Should I also be looking at chat or just Q&A?
I think it's okay just to look at the Q&A. I'll read any questions that people type in the chat.
Okay.
I got a raised hand here. I got Scott that wants to say something. Is that all right, Kimberly?
Okay, yeah, please.
Yep, let me pull Scott up. All right. Hi, Scott.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep,
yes,
go ahead there.
Yes.
All right. Hello, I had a quick question. A lot of us have different contexts, and mine is mostly university, first and second year. So I run into a problem where I'd love to be doing the academic word list, but a lot of my students are, they need to be reviewing the first 2,000 words of English. But the material we're working with may require them to have, more advanced vocabulary. Do you recommend that we backtrack and actually go back and make sure that they have those first 2,000 words before, even if we have to deal with more complex material in the classroom at times? Like, what do we do when we face that sort of situation where the materials and the demands are for something a little more advanced and the students are necessarily prepared for?
Right, yeah, that's a very good question, and so frequent as well. I think that happens a lot. So as the classroom teacher, you might not be able to make those curriculum decisions, but yet where your students are at, especially if you have vocabulary tested their levels. So I would just so you have evidence for yourself, I would do the levels test just to make sure. And then when you see that they don't know the 2K, then definitely see if you can incorporate that as like additional work that you can create for your students, like as homework, because they really need to know those high frequency words first, or learn them in addition to the academic words that they're learning. But without a solid foundation on those first 2,000 words, anything that they're working on is going to be so frustrating as I hope you felt frustrated reading that text that we looked at earlier, that short paragraph. So yeah, this is the problem. Classroom teachers can't make those decisions, but you can talk to your students about it and explain to them, you know, here, I've done your test. You don't know these 2,000 words. Here's some tools where you can find those words and study on your own, or, you know, if you can, you know, that Oxford, the word lists are great tools for students to learn by themselves as well, if they're keen, you know.
Right.
Is that okay?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think I've been trying to do that, but a lot of my courses end up being 4-skill courses anyway, so it's kind of hard to fit everything in, right? Especially if you have certain key things in the syllabus you have to hit. So it's a balance.
Right. And something I did want to show, but I knew I wouldn't have time today, was about closed tests. If you Google closed tests and Bormoth 1968, maybe I'll put that in the chat box. So closed tests are where I'm suggesting closed tests as a way for teachers to demonstrate to their administration or whoever makes the curriculum decisions that maybe the texts are too difficult for their students. So, I mean, yeah, so maybe I won't go into great detail about it, but I think, you know, it's a little frustrating for teachers. They know where their students' gaps of knowledge are, and yet we can't really affect change like we might like to.
Right. Right.
So there's another question on the Q&A from Eric, and he says, could you show us how to use LexTutor test on the first day? Eric, are you talking about the vocabulary levels test? That one?
Hold on just a second so that maybe Phil, can you give Eric the ability to speak? Eric Ritter.
Okay, he said yes. Okay. Yeah, can I just share my screen then to do that?
Yes, please.
Okay, so this is LexTutor. And so I'll just minimize that. And so the tests are, yeah, he's always changing a bit, but the tests are on the right-hand side. So if you click on that, there's a lot of tests. So I suggested this one, but actually, Eric, are you going to be doing online teaching this fall?
Yes.
Okay, and what level are your students approximately? Beginner, intermediate?
Intermediate.
Okay, then I might suggest this one, the updated VLT. So that opens a new link, so I have to stop sharing that and find that one. Okay, so I don't know if I did that too quickly, but on the vocabulary levels test page, if you find updated VLT and then you click on interactive, then you'll get this, what I'm sharing on my screen right now. So it's called the updated. And so it has instructions for students, and you can try it yourself. Definitely, like, just do it yourself. So there's 30 words if this per level, and they have to do all 5 levels. So they're going to find 4 and 5K maybe frustrating, I'm not sure. But it is made for a student, so it guides them through it. But I recommend that you as a teacher just give it a try. And then when they get to the end of the test, they can put your email in there and their email so that both of you get the results, and then you don't have to mark anything. Yay. And so this is what the test looks like. So it's good to go over an example with them, maybe, if you can. And they could either do the test during class time, or you could set it for homework. Another nice feature of this test is that when you get the feedback, it's going to tell you how much time the student spent. So my students spent about 30 minutes doing this test, and I encourage them to take a break between each level because it kind of gets exhausting just looking at these words. But on average, they took about 30 minutes. So students who took 2 or 3 hours, I don't know what they were doing, but I did encourage all students to not use a dictionary. It's not for grades. It's for our information. It's for their information. You want to help them, explain all that. And I think they're pretty receptive to that. As long as you explain, it's not for grades, it's just for information. And then I think they won't be inclined to cheat, use a dictionary. So is that okay?
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, it's really nice for online. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Can I read a question that we have from one person in the audience?
Yeah, please.
As an instructor, when do I start to suggest to students using context clues for predicting the meaning of unknown words? Like, what criteria do I need for this?
So, yeah, using context to infer meaning is a really good skill. It's a very difficult skill for students to learn well. I would devote some training to it, some really scaffolded training where you could work together. What criteria? I guess I might choose, if I wanted to demonstrate this, I might choose a word that had, I'm trying to think of an example now, that had like kind of a core meaning in English that they might know, but they might not, it might not be applicable in this context. And then so you could demonstrate to them that they could use their knowledge of that core meaning of that word to extrapolate what it might mean in this context. I think it's great skill to teach students how to use context, activating their knowledge about parts of speech and all those years they spent studying grammar. So what is the part of speech of this word, part of the speech of this word in this sentence and so forth. But it is a really difficult skill for students to learn, and I just don't have a lot of classroom time to devote to it. But you're right, students need to know this if they're going to become independent readers. So it is worth spending time. I've read studies where even highly proficient readers of English, they are correct less than 50% of the time. So if you are teaching how to infer meaning from context in order for the purpose to be vocabulary learning, that's not a good use of time, I don't think. Because chances are less than 50% that they'll be correct. And yeah, that's a very interesting whole can of worms, that, but I hope I kind of answered the question somewhere in there.
I hope so too. I'm sorry I couldn't read the Japanese kanji very well enough to say their name. My apologies for that.
Oh, okay, okay.
I actually have, we're actually streaming live over on Facebook on the JALT token. We have a question on there for Kimberly, if that's okay. It's from actually Wayne Malcolm, our director of programs. Yes, I think that's right. Okay. Wayne asked, what were your ups and downs when transitioning to emergency remote teaching?
In relation to vocabulary, or?
I think just in general is what he was referring to.
In general. Yeah, well, probably using tools like this, Zoom. Actually, my university has Google Suite, so actually that was one of the least worries I had. I was using Google Meet, and Google Classroom, which was a nice to have all that infrastructure there was really great. So it allowed me to be stressed about other things. As I said, that vocabulary test was super great so that I could get some feedback about these students that I wouldn't be seeing in the classroom. But I guess the strangest thing was, yeah, just like this webinar, like just talking and not, you know, seeing faces. And that was probably the biggest challenge for me. It's still weird. But as Matthew mentioned earlier, you can just talk and cover a lot of ground and hope some of it stuck in. So hopefully everyone came away with at least one tool or idea that they can use, hopefully.
Any more questions?
Was there a hand raised earlier, Phil? I thought I saw somebody had raised their hand.
That's what I saw, but apparently it went back down, so maybe not. So.
Okay. Right. I saw the name as well, but I don't want to call anybody out. If you still have a question, please don't hesitate. But
Eric did have a question on the Q&A.
Okay.
He said whether I had a view on Paul Nation's 4,000 essential word books. I'm actually not familiar with those. So
they consist of stories made up of the vocabulary of those words.
okay.
That makes sense. That's a simple.
What's the purpose of them? Speed reading or?
That's a good question.
It's vocabulary learning, and they have 20 new words per chapter, and then 2-3 pages of exercises, and then simple stories. The stories have been pretty bad, are actually not very good. But this year I started using level 4, which is based on the AWL, and I found it worked pretty well. And so I just was wondering if you had if you'd used any particular vocabulary books, because I found it to be reasonably good in pronunciation and some exercises. But
that's great. I actually don't use any vocabulary books. I just use the reading text that I have to use for our program. And so I target vocabulary from that. And fortunately, the readings are around, there's several readings on one topic, for example. So some of that vocabulary gets repeated in different readings, so that's quite nice. I don't use vocabulary books. I'm a big proponent of extensive reading, which is graded readers would provide students with that exposure to high frequency and mid frequency vocabulary that they need and that they're not getting.
We also use X reading as well. But
yeah, that's great. That's great, because that's that lower level processing that they need. So, but they need to do a lot of it, like at least one reader a week at their level, I would say. So that's really good exposure. But yeah, I'm not really familiar with these vocabulary books, but you know, Paul Nation is the vocabulary god. So if he put his name on something, it's probably well designed and well thought out, and you know, maybe explain that to your students, you know, what the purpose of it is. I think students like to know that rather than just having these random words thrown at them. Maybe.
Well, this is a vocabulary class, so it's a reading and vocabulary class, and but I've wanted to do the test you had shown me, but I hadn't quite gotten around to it.
Okay, yeah. So then definitely, yeah, I would teach, you know, or you know, definitely if it was a vocabulary course, I would teach things like, you know, vocabulary learning skills or strategies that they might not be comfortable with or have tried before, but like word cards and guessing from context. And yeah, we don't have any vocabulary courses, so it's kind of have to deal with it as we go along with our reading and writing courses.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thanks for your questions and comments.
Are there any other questions that you see, Phil? Oh, there's one more. Oh, there's one more in the Q&A, Kimberly.
Yeah, so my kanji also isn't great. Something re. Just saying that they also use Paul Nation's 4,000 essential word books for their intermediate class. And yeah, so yeah, Paul Nation, yeah, he's great. Maybe I should do a little plug for him. I know there's another conference coming up in 2 weeks, the Hiroshima Vocabulary Acquisition Research Group. They're doing an online, I think it's 3 days, and Paul Nation will be one of the keynote speakers there, along with Avril Coxhead and 2 other big names that I just can't remember right now. But that's in 2 weeks, so September 5th, 6th, I think. Could I share the invite? Sure. Now I'm trying to remember. I'm just going to type, if you Google, did I answer that then? Oh, is that for everybody or just for Eric? I don't know. Okay, maybe I'll do it in the...
Everybody can see it.
Oh, everyone can see it? Okay. My first webinar. Yeah, so if you just Google HVARG, which stands for Hiroshima Vocabulary Acquisition Research Group, it'll come up, I'm sure, all the information.
Okay. And Scott also raised his hand to ask a question. There we go. Hi.
Okay. I'm sorry, that was an accident.
Oh. Okay, thanks, Scott. Okay. Then,
okay, let's
any other questions from anybody? You can raise your hand or type, or if not.
Also,
okay.
any general comments you would like to give as well.
Yes, please. Yes. Well, while we're maybe waiting for comments or other questions, I want to take this chance to say thank you very much. This has been really lovely and eye-opening, and lots of good tools to take forward for me personally, and I'm sure for most of the participants as well. So thank you very, very much for your time on this Friday evening.
Exactly. That means
yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. Hi. Any last questions from anyone? Looks like we're good. Yes. Okay. So thank you very much, and have a lovely weekend. And thanks to everyone for coming along tonight and for participating and asking questions and everything. So thank you very much.
great. Have a nice weekend.